Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's O'Malley Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru! Israel too? E Africa? One Africa? One nation. Uhuru! Wake up, everybody. I am Secretary General Ghazi Kodzo of the African People's Socialist Party, serving as your MC and moderator for today's special episode of hashtag O'Malley Taught Me. Ask the Chairman. This episode, Chairman will be answering the questions from viewers of this study located all around the world. Questions pertaining to the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. For the past 12 weeks, y'all, 12 whole weeks. What's that, like 3 months? The chairman has been taking us chapter by chapter of the political report, preparing us for the Congress that is taking place this upcoming weekend, October 6th, October 12th, in St. Louis, Missouri, y'all. Vanguard up! I said Vanguard up! And if you are not registered yet, you better go and register and learn more at apspcongress.org right now. Over the course of these readings, people tuning in via Facebook and YouTube and here in St. Louis, people have been coming in, y'all, early in the morning, have left outstanding comments and burning questions. And Chairman is going to take this opportunity today to answer some of those questions. Before we start, we just wanted to appreciate all of your dedicated viewers, all of our dedicated viewers who have watched and engaged with us during this special series. Every series that we've had, every episode that we've had, the viewers have been rising over more and more all of the time, and it's just a show that the entire world and the African nation wants to grasp more of African internationalism and unite with our real leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru! Long live! Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Long live! Chairman Omali Yeshitela. All right, that is nothing to whisper. Okay, so... All right, so we know that in a world where white power imperialism is dying and the ruling class can't provide explanations or answers, that the chairman and the theory of African internationalism has always been able to and always will. Most of us in the world have gathered on these studies to get those answers, and today we will learn even more. It is my honor now to introduce the visionary revolutionary leader himself, the reason why we are here, the start of it all, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman! Long live! Long live! Uhuru! Uhuru. So we will begin with our first question. Okay. So Uhuru, we will begin with our first question. This is in regard to Chapter 1, Chairman, which is titled The Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment, coming from Derek McKeever from, ATL, Georgia. Thought I told you. His question is, in the movement moving fast enough in regards... Is the movement moving fast enough in regards to capturing local and state political power? Is funding an issue? Question mark.
Uhuru, I want to express appreciation to Comrade Derek for that question. What I would like to do, however, before addressing that question is to express my appreciation to all of you, members of the African People's Socialist Party and of the Uhuru movement and others who have participated in this 12-week-long discussion that we've been involved in. And I want to remind everybody that what we've been discussing over the last 12 weeks is the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. As the chairman of that party, it is my responsibility, I am obligated to present to the Congress a political report, a summation of how we understand and see the world, our location at any particular time in the world, what the lineup of forces in the world look like as it relates to the struggle to win our freedom, to win our liberation, and then and then to project the future for us, where we have to go, and what is it going to take for us to get there. And in the process of getting there, how do we measure the forces that are arrayed against us? In other words, it's a discussion about how we capture political power. We talk about what social forces are absolutely necessary for us to be able to declare victory, what has to happen in the world for us to declare victory. It moves us beyond simple single issue kind of politic. It moves us beyond the small circle type of politic that so many of us have been engaged in, and so many are engaged in at this moment. And I'm required to have done this at least 3 months prior to the Congress that's happening next weekend. And the reason it has been required for me to do this is because it is to provide an opportunity for members of our party to be able to participate in this Congress from an informed perspective, to be able to come to this Congress having measured every word that has been written, everything that we've talked about, and to see how and whether the political report expresses the world as it is being experienced, and to come to this Congress and be prepared to leave change in the world. It's not just an opportunity to come and have discussions and to be able to pat ourselves on the back now because we are blacker than somebody else, or because we know something that others don't have. In fact, our objective here is to be able to explain the world in a fashion that informs us how to change the world that we live in. That's what it's all about. And that's why we've been engaged in this discussion, and it gives not only members of our party and our movement an opportunity to participate in the Congress in the best way, it also allows others in the whole world to be able to experience this process too, because obviously everybody who has been participating in these studies for the last 12 weeks or so is not a member of the African People's Socialist Party or the Uhuru movement. There are many people who participate who are allies, who are friends of our movement, friends of our struggle. And it's important for them to understand where we're going. Some are friends of our struggle without knowing that they should be friends of the African People's Socialist Party. Because for the last more than 2 generations, as a consequence of the United States government and other imperial forces around the world crushing a revolutionary movement, not only of Africans in this country, but the African Revolution around the world and other places. As a consequence of that, there has not been that much of a discussion about revolution, about overturning the world. In fact, many of our people have been pushed backwards, have been demoralized, having seen leaders killed and arrested. And much of the time that we've spent over the last period has been looking at the question of political prisoners, because there are so many people who were arrested during that era, during that period. And in other words, the thing is that much of the struggle has been spent looking backwards and trying to repair some of the damage done to us without having the ability to see how we move this revolutionary project forward and what it would take to win our freedom. This is an extremely critical time in history. We've said that over and over again. And the last time we said it, yesterday, last week, that was made obvious by certain facts in the world. And then what we do is we look at this week, and we've seen so much more that has occurred that enhances our understanding, so we say it again. Of course, what happens from time to time is last week there were certain numbers of people who were able to understand this, certain groups of people who were able to understand something about the crisis of imperialism. But today, the crisis of imperialism reveals itself another way. So this week, somebody else understands it. So growing numbers of people are faced with the inability of the empire, of imperialism, to solve their problems. Right now, We are looking at a world where the highest expressions of bourgeois, of imperialists, of world white power morality has been made naked for the world to see. We are talking about a Catholic church, a church which has then Christianity, which of course has been recognized for a long time as the foundation in many ways, as foundational to European imperialist solidarity, national solidarity and what have you. And here the Catholic Church has been exposed to the world as an organization, an international organization of criminal pedophilia, where children are being raped on a regular basis, thousands and thousands of children around the world. We're not talking about a single incident in Philadelphia or in Houston, Texas. We're talking about all over the world, in every country where there is social media and internet capacity to report on it, to discuss it, and what have you. The church has been involved, the priests have been involved in raping children and sometimes raping nuns. This is the highest expression of morality of white power that we are talking about. And then we see, of course, we've known about the church. The church is that institution that moralized and papal bulls justified and called for the so-called holy war that resulted in a war against Muslims all over what is now called the Middle East and North Africa, this whole looting expedition that they were involved in. That struggle continues even to this day. And so we know about the church. We know how the church, we had that saying that when the white man came, he had the Bible and we had the land. And now we end up with the Bible and he's got the land. It's a whole reflection of how the church has been involved in our lives. We know the Pope is the one that set the terms for where Portugal would be involved in the slave trade, and then where Spain would be involved in the trade and capture and trade of African people. It's been stuck up to its nostrils in war and attacks against the oppressed peoples around the world. So we've known this all along. And now we have a situation where the altar boy who lived in Philadelphia is not alone with his own shame and pain, but he is accompanied by millions of others who've had the same experience, and everybody recognizes it collectively, and that's a powerful thing. And then this thing has been pushed to the surface, so the world is looking at the church. And in many ways, we've come to understand that unfrocking of the priest means something quite different behind closed doors than what we've come to understand it to mean otherwise. The rape that has occurred, the rape of white boys now, which now obviously is impermissible, is something that the world can see. And then we see that the President of the United States, that all the presidents, every one of them, some which have been historically associated with groups like the Klan, and which is why it's such an error to be able to point to special organizations of oppression and exploitation is the essential question. The Klan was simply an organization that represents popular white nationalist state power. The people at one time complained, because liberals did, because Marcus Garvey met with the leaders of the Klan while they were meeting with Presidents Woodrow Wilson and others, and as if the Klan was more powerful than the President of the United States when it came to oppressing and killing Africans, so that it was permissible to meet with the U.S. presidential killer on the one hand, but it was impermissible, who was not going to do anything to deal with the terror that was being waged against African people by groups like the Klan, But it was impermissible for Marcus Garvey to go straight to the source and talk to this person in the Klan because he was trying to mobilize to make African people have the mobility to be able to organize throughout the South and to let them know, we don't want your sister. What we want is our freedom, etc. And that's what we are fighting for, not to integrate with you, but to have our own. We've seen the President of the United States now, in this instance, on today, different from the Slick Willies of yesterday, different from the Roosevelts of the past. This president, this person who makes blatant statements and does more or less what he says against us, every time he opens his mouth, he clearly tells a lie. Whereas the Slick Willies and the Roosevelts and the others of them and the Kennedys, while they told a lie, they didn't look like they were lying when they did it. They were cleverer, and they knew how to mince their words, and they had clever wordsmiths that would say things that were to keep us calm as they were killing us. As Malcolm X used to say, they function as a kind of social Novocaine, so that they would be killing us and we wouldn't recognize that it was happening. But now with Trump, he says it and he does it. And so a lot of people are obviously upset about that, but it's clear. Trump makes no bones about it. It's clear that he is a killer, that he's a thug, that he's a billionaire person who is engaged in furthering the interests of the empire in a very naked and brutal way. And even as he makes war against Africans and others in the United States, he's making war against the oppressed peoples of the world. He's making war against the people of Palestine. He's continuing that crusade that began in the 11th century. They complain about he's separating children from their families at the borders, but imperialism came into existence through the separation of children through their families. That's how black people got to this place that's now called the United States. That's how Africans got to all these places outside of Africa. That's what the borders on the continent of Africa represent, separating families from their children, families from each other. So Trump is not different in this way. But today, the way Trump's moved, he's removed all of the nice language and the pretext about what he is doing. And that's been really remarkable. And then we have to look also at what's happening now with this, the hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee that we've just witnessed up to this point, where this person who has been put forward for a seat on the Supreme Court. And of course, this is something that every liberal, black and white and otherwise has been concerned that, wow, Trump has the ability to put somebody on the Supreme Court, and this is going to be death and disaster, and perhaps the world is coming to an end. And what we've seen through this process is the Supreme Court nominee, Kavanaugh, who is just a white guy. He's a rich white guy who has been accused of, when he was 17 years old, molesting a 15-year-old white girl. And the thing that is really striking, and one of the things striking about this, of course, is all the white women of the world and white liberals are extraordinarily upset about this. He brought so much pain to this 15-year-old white girl. And of course, the reality is that white women historically have been a part of covering up for their husbands and their boyfriends and their brothers and their fathers in the rape of African women and other oppressed peoples around the world. They are raping women right now as we have this discussion in places like Afghanistan and other areas of military and political occupation. And what is it about white women that they would assume that their boyfriends, husbands, brothers, uncles, fathers would rape all the other women in the world and wouldn't rape them? This is an extraordinary kind of situation. And so we watched these country club, this story about country club behavior. They knew each other, Kavanaugh and the woman Ford, because they members of the same country club at 15 and 17 years old. And they talked about how there were parties where women were girls were commonly, ordinarily raped, gang raped as a matter of good old boy white fun. They talked about these guys, Kavanaugh, going to the Supreme Court, who would drink till he would puke all over himself, and they would get drunk and passed out. And this was common stuff that they were doing. And even the newscasters who were talking about it recognized, well, you know, boys do this kind of stuff when they are such and such an age. These are the people, all of them, the church, the president, the people who would sit on the Supreme Court, the professor white woman, people who have power and use that power to define black people every day, committing all kinds of horrible offenses. They are the ones who set the template for morality and make judgments against us. They are the ones who are able to write articles in the newspaper that says it's all right to kill the kid, 15 years old, because after all, he does come from this background where he lives in the slums, and they have no respect for anything. They are the ones who are able to do that. I looked at a press conference, a newscast just the other day, and here's this white boy, Anderson Cooper or something, who says, oh yeah, I was in the same class with Kavanaugh. They are the ones. They set the moral template, and then we are judged by them on every instance. And what we are saying today is that morality is not to be found there. Morality is to be found among those of us who have been oppressed and exploited by them, by the Kavanaughs, by the Trumps, by the Kennedys, by the Clintons, and all of them. They are the ones who oppress us, and they are defining morality, but our morality is one that recognizes that it has to serve humanity. It has to serve liberation and freedom of the people. And that's where morality is to be found, and not through these drunken idiots gangsters, people who have the guns and what have you, that's able to keep people colonized and terrorizing people around the world, and every African community in this country, every barrio, every so-called Indian reservation that's nothing but a concentration camp. They make the judgments, but we know that judgment day is coming. And they will not be ultimately the ones who will make the judgment. So I'm saying all of this because it is a part of the crisis of imperialism, and it is that situation, that narrative, against which this Congress of the African People's Socialist Party is happening next week, where the oppressed peoples of the world will be able to see their future in the struggle of African people in a way that we haven't seen in the last 100 years. 98 years ago, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Communities League, under the leadership of Marcus Garvey, introduced the red, black, and green flag to the world, where African people, 25 to 50,000 strong, at Madison Square Garden, had the most democratic expression that we've had since we came to know white people, when we voted ourselves on our own platform, our own agenda, our own political report defining what it is that we were going to do. 98 years ago, August 1920, African people came together and decided that we do have a flag. We do have a future. That flag is the red, black, and green, and set out to make a revolutionary movement. And today, what we are saying is that the dream and the vision of Marcus Garvey lives today, and African people are still engaged in that struggle. And this political report is the testimony of the fact that we engaged in that struggle, and we've opened up the ability of African people around the world, essentially the African working class, under the leadership of the African working class, to be able to participate in a democratic process again, to take back our freedom, and to bring a real morality to the planet Earth. And this will be socialist morality under the leadership of the most oppressed and despised sector of the human population today. So I want to get back now to the comrade brother who raised the question earlier on. And his question
was, is the movement moving fast enough in regards to capturing local and state political power? Is funding an issue?
First of all, what I want to do is make it clear that when we talk about capturing political power, while our strategic objective is to take all the power, it's not some local power, it's to take all the power. And it is not limited to the concept of winning an election or something to that effect. And I'm raising that because there is some potential that that's what I've heard in the question, an assumption that when we talk about state power, we might be talking about a local state power, that is to say city councils and you know, other offices like that. We're talking about all the power. We're talking about ultimately being able to overthrow the relationship we have with city councils, the relationship we have to governments of Germany and the United States and France and the neo-colonial puppet regimes that exist throughout Africa and throughout other places where neo-colonialism exists. So that's the first thing I want to say. Secondly, in relationship to that, as a tactic, we will engage and do engage and have engaged and will engage more in electoral politics, not as a way out, but as a means of positioning ourselves to be able to wage more effective struggle, to be able to take back our total absolute liberation. And some of the things that we do in all of our practice are things that are designed to put us in a better position to take full power. And so while if we mean by local power becoming a political force in St. Louis, yeah, that's what we want. We want all the power. If we mean by taking local power that we want to attain capture power in a particular artificial country that's been created, yeah, we want to do that. And I have to change my mic. If it's as serious as people make it, you might already know I need to change my mic.
Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you. First, thank you so much for that amazing overview. Uhuru! Yes. Judgment Day is coming for the white ruling class. Ain't that right, comrades? Yeah. Uhuru! Fist up! Fight back! Get these pigs! I'll fight back! Uhuru! Uhuru, Chairman. So, yes, we just really wanted to appreciate that amazing and profound overview. Where else are you getting this kind of analysis and theory other than from the African working class, other than Chairman Omali Yeshitela, other than African internationalism? And that is exactly what this political report has given to the African nation, a light at the end of the tunnel, a to what end? Uhuru. So now, Chairman, for our next question. Okay, so we're going to go back to...
It's not that much more. The comment asked is funding an issue? And funding is always an issue. And of course, we're not talking about just running some kind of campaign, a political campaign that we may do from time to time. And funding means one thing under those circumstances. But anybody familiar with us recognize that we do everything we can to generate self-funding. So that we don't voluntarily enter into another relationship of slavery with the major corporations and the bourgeoisie in this country. So we struggle to do everything we can to win participation of the masses in the struggle, so that we can involve in funding ourselves. We fund the bourgeoisie all the time. We funded every time we go to see a silly movie like Black Panther, or every time we go to a club, or every time we have some clown come to perform for us, we are funding the bourgeoisie. Now we have to fund ourselves, and masses of African people need to be engaged in that. And that's what it means to have an advanced attachment, a political party that represents the interests of the masses of the people. So we are here. And we try to create the conditions and circumstances under which the masses of our people can participate in self-funding, fund ourselves, participate in the Black Power Blueprint, participate in the Uhuru furniture stores, and participate in all of the projects that we establish. This is one way we do it, and of course you can make your contributions as well. So if there's the slightest suggestion that there may be a shortage of funding, and the question suggests that there is an assumption that we may be short of funding, we do take contributions, so you can send it. And the other thing I want to say is that we have initiated, people talk all the time about reparations. I had an uncle whom I love so much who used to say that a conversation is the cheapest commodity on the block. Everybody's got one. So everybody's talking about reparations, but we're not just talking it, we are collecting reparations today. And our struggle for reparations gives others, whites, an opportunity to also participate in funding the revolution, funding the destruction of white power imperialism, because that's what we are about. So uhuru.
Yeah. Uhuru. Uhuru. Round of applause for that. Yes. Uhuru. Thank you so much for that question. Who has the... Yes, thank you so much for that question, Derek. And if you are watching this and you are concerned about the funding of the revolution, please go to blackpowerblueprint.org and donate today. Or if you're white, pay reparations today at blackpowerblueprint.org. Our next question, Chairman, is from James D. Logan. And his question was on Chapter 2, Our Party Solved the Problems of Revolution. And his concerns was around why we are using the terms socialist and communist. He says that I will never understand why the language of the slave takers is always adopted by those claiming to stand for African freedom. Is this a subtle sign of a lie? Question mark.
No, but the question was raised in English. So I don't know what that means. I mean, it's, except it's a silly question. And it's a question that's often thrown at us, people who are trying to make a revolution, want to make revolution, want to destroy imperialism, want to destroy capitalism born from slavery and colonialism. And the moment we get involved in this struggle, we get somebody who's supposed to be on our side, who comes out and say, well, the problem is that you're using the white man's language, and he uses the white man's language in order to say it. Which is extraordinarily silly. The problem is you're trying to stop the struggle for socialism and communism. And that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for power to the African working class, the power to the African working class. And the only one who is opposed to that are the national oppressors and class enemies of the African workers. So I hope that was an effective response to the question that you raised, and hopefully you'll come to your senses. The thing that's really interesting about today, I think about this when I look at somebody like Bill Cosby, who is a sellout, lick-spittle Negro on the one hand, and I'm thinking about, I knew that even with Cosby's sentence, and there was not a Catholic priest in the world that was quivering, thinking, oh, they're coming for me next, right? But the thing that's really striking to me is that even during era of legal slavery, when there were certain sectors of our population on the continent of Africa who thought they were above being taken into slavery, and who would actually participate, actually work with the people who would come to enslave us and help them, and then they found out they were getting captured too, and brought into the same conditions as the rest of us. And I think about that with Mr. Cosby. And I think about that with all those other Negroes who think that somehow you can be on the side of white power and that you will escape it. Because the statement from Mr. Logan is a statement that simply says that we shouldn't fight for power of the African working class and to overturn national oppressor unless we learn how to do it in an acceptable language, I guess, you know. So I guess everybody should go, you know, to some kind of linguistic academy, and even then this problematic because all the numbers of languages being spoken. I think about people like Amilcar Cabral, who lived under Portuguese colonialism and raised the slogan "A luta continua" in Portuguese, and the Portuguese hated that. That wasn't their language. Their language was to enslave black people, and when Cabral and the people who were fighting that revolution, they said it in Portuguese. They said "A luta continua," the struggle continues, right? That was not the language of the Portuguese. That was the language of those who had been enslaved by the Portuguese, and that's what needs to be understood. Uhuru.
Thank you so much for that answer, Chairman. Now, our next question comes from Robin Denise Wynn from Tampa, Florida. And her question is from the chapter 3, which is titled, How the Party Survived Counterinsurgency, one of my favorite chapters. And her question is, Chairman, where are all the sellout preachers today? Why aren't they in the streets fighting?
I think the question answers itself. And where are the sellouts preachers, if they haven't been captured and taken into captivity like the others, they're doing what they've always done. They're selling us out. And what I think is really important to understand, and when you talk about sellout preachers, that's an interesting kind of characterization. Somebody would say that it's redundant to say sellout and preachers. I'm not one of them, but some people would. The thing is that that even, you know, like honest preachers and what have you, they motivated ideologically, theoretically, differently than African internationalists. And they are what we refer to as philosophical idealists. And we are historical materialists. And our understanding of the world and what would take to change the world comes to examination of the world as it is, not as we would have it to be. And not the Bible or not some document like that, but to examine the world, to look at the world. And so our approach is different than the approach that you will ever find from the Bible or from the church or from a Christian or from a Muslim based on Islam itself. Based on Islam or based on Christianity, we are not motivated by any religious idealist philosophy. We are motivated by the concrete material world that has come into existence as a consequence of Africans and oppressed peoples of the world being captured by colonial slavery. That's the thing that motivates us. That's the thing that informs us. That's the starting point of our investigation. We don't need to check out Adam and Eve to get to that. You understand? We talk about the starting point of our investigation being this whole history of oppression and exploitation that gave rise to, that gave birth to a particular social system that has the entire world locked into its death embrace. And how do we get out of here? How do we get here? And how do we get out of here? That's what we study. That's what we understand. And that's what informs all the practice that we're involved in. And that, of course, makes us different from most preachers. Now, there were good preachers, you know, I mean, like Nat Turner, you know, who said, strike at night and spare no one. You understand? And who would have religious visions. I looked up and I saw that the white horse was fighting with the black horse, and there was blood all over the trees and what have you, etc. So, I mean, they were good preachers, but what they were about is the liberation of African people. And even though they preached the gospel, what informed their actual activities and even their sermons was the conditions that African people suffered. And even early African participation in Christianity was due to the fact that Christianity appeared to us to be a religion of the oppressed. It was the religion of the oppressed, and that was what was most readily available to us. And we interpreted this book, this Bible, not based on some fanciful future, but we translated it in a way that this fanciful future represented the freedom that we were all involved in looking for. And I got a hunch that the person around whom most of this religious mysticism was born, was involved in the same kind of struggle, because the man Yeshua, known as Jesus, was somebody who was engaged along with the rest of his people in a struggle against Roman imperialism, Roman colonialism, Roman occupation. And that was a problem that they had to solve. And that's why he died as a political prisoner. He died, his death was a political death, because the Romans, the crucifixion was the punishment for a political crime, not for sin, but a political crime. And so to the extent that the preachers want to engage in making this political struggle to being like Yeshua, we can be down with them. But otherwise, somebody has asked the question before, how, if Jesus was a revolutionary, how could your preacher be such a, yeah, so, but generally speaking, that's the fundamental answer. And the solution to all of this we learned a long time ago was, if we want future, and if we want somehow the church to have some kind of relationship to this, then our task has to be to win the congregation. Because the congregation who pays the salary of the preacher is the one who experience the police killings in our community. The congregation is the one that's got members of the congregation, how to pay the rent. The congregation facing the ongoing insults by those who have power, like the Kavanaughs of the world, and even the Fords of the world, the accuser of Kavanaugh, who occupy these spaces as professors in universities that most of us will never, ever be able to get to, right? You know, I guess that's my response to that particular question. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Yes. Vanguard up. Vanguard up. I said Vanguard up. Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you so much for that answer. Now for our next question we have is from Chapter 4, The Deepening Crisis of Imperialism. And this was asked by Comrade Jackson Hollingsworth of St. Petersburg, Florida. Uhuru, Chairman, can you speak to the white power media and the Democratic Party really putting forward Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat in New York City? Uhuru.
Uhuru. First thing I think we need to do is destroy this myth about the media somehow being that which keeps an eye on those in power and is engaged in constantly exposing them to the benefit of the people. That is this objective force that does that. And I remind people it's the media that was used to put out the ads for escaped captive people who were enslaved. And I've been engaged in situations where the media actually made deals with the FBI to come to press conferences where the police were not welcome and things like that, and made deals that they would give the FBI transcripts of what I said as a condition for being able to get the story. You know, you hear about the honest reporters. The reporters are honest, et cetera, et cetera. I've been in situations where reporters have actually said, we can't carry this article. If we say what you said here, this thing will create riots in the streets or something to that effect. Media personnel have told us that. And I remember this woman who came to be quite famous woman who was in Oakland, California, in the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area, who was the one that promoted African children as, what's that term they came up with for our children, super predators. The woman, she's got I think, Spanish-Irish name. What was her name? Say it again. Soledad O'Brien, you know. I guess that says it all. But Soledad O'Brien, who, you know, promoted this whole, and we had fundamental contradictions with her on that. We know that the media participates in actual self-censorship. You don't have to, the bourgeoisie doesn't have to censor them. They're crying about Trump saying there's fake media, fake news. Well, hell, it is fake media, fake news. It always has been. It was fake when they was promoting Trump. It was fake. Yeah. It was fake before Trump seemed to have discovered it. Conveniently, it was fake. It created the images of our people. It characterizes people all around the world. It's helped to create the so-called Russian enemy. It's helped to define the people in Palestine and all these other places where the United States government is involved in murder, and they've covered up for the priests and the popes all these years. It's only because of some contradiction that's happening within the bourgeoisie that we are even hearing about these predators through media sources. They knew it all along. They knew all along about. They go to the same country clubs as the Kavanaughs, as we've just said. So they know what happens there. So they've been involved in self-censorship forever. So they don't serve us. The media do not serve us. And if you can read about it in the newspapers in a favorable way, then you have to be suspicious about what it is. Or if you can listen to it, if it's generally favorable, you have to be suspicious about that. When you look at someone like the New York election and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democrat in New York, there are two things about that. One, Alexander Ocasio-Cortez may have started this journey as an innocent opportunist. Honest opportunist. That is to say, she may very well have been motivated by conviction. And of course, honest opportunists are the most dangerous, or the worst kind, because they are motivated by conviction, as opposed to the hustlers who you can buy and pay them off to do such a thing. And when we say opportunists, we're talking about this ability to sell the long-term interests of the masses, of the working and oppressed people, for some kind of short-term benefit for a sector of the petty bourgeoisie or the bourgeoisie itself. And that is the thing that helps us to define these persons, because anybody who's watched Alexandria Cortez recognize that she is not somebody who has even addressed the questions of colonialism and the nature of the social system itself. She doesn't condemn the social system. What she does is condemn symptoms of the social system. She doesn't condemn the flu. She condemns the fact that you get aches after you catch the flu. So we are saying that the bourgeois media does what it's supposed to do. And you have to remember that the bourgeois media are owned by corporations just like General Motors, and just like the ones that own all the other corporations that people like to recognize we're fighting against. I hear these pseudo leftists and so-called Bernie Sanders socialists who talk about having to fight against the corporations and things like that. Well, the media are owned by corporations. These are major corporations with as much interest in the outcome of an election, with as much interest in the survival of imperialism itself as General Motors, as any other major corporation, and they are not going to do anything that sacrifices the stability and survival of of the system itself. And increasingly, what we're seeing is that when so many people foolishly thought that we could count on social media and Facebook and all these other major corporations to as venues through which we could articulate our views, even this that we're using at this very moment, you're crazy. You should be learning smoke signals and other means of communication, because the bourgeoisie will cut it off in a way to keep us from being able to communicate with you and with each other. And reliance on the social system itself is a problem. And when you rely on the bourgeois media, when you rely on the ruling class, colonial capitalist media, you are relying on the social system. When you rely on opportunist media, you are relying on the social system. And so, this media will seduce your leaders, will seduce your preachers, the people who you think have moral authority, will seduce honest people who come from among the colonized communities of the world will seduce them, will purchase them, will flatter them, will do everything that's necessary to turn them into stooges and opponents of the very same things that they say that they represent in the world. So I don't know this woman, and I've seen her a couple of times on TV, and I was first really struck by a certain kind of ineptitude that was kind of obvious, and recognized the real fact that she was able to win that election because masses of people throughout this country and around the world are fed up and tired of this nasty social system. And that's why it's not necessary to be a sellout to win. In fact, because people are tired, we have to give them other alternatives. And many of the opportunists of the black and otherwise find themselves only able to view the struggle for power within the context of the existing social system with what they call the duopoly, the Democrats and the Republicans, etc. And they will contain the struggle there among them. And when they look at where the balance of forces lie, they don't look at the masses versus the social system. They don't look at colonized Africans versus the social system. They don't look at the people of Afghanistan versus a whole capitalist colonial system that came into existence at our expense. They look at the Democrats versus the Republicans. That's where they think the contest is, and that's why they will always find themselves in a camp of opportunism, and that's why it's so important for everybody to recognize the significance of October 6th through the 12th and the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, because we are planning to govern. And we are planning to govern despite what the Democrats and Republicans, what Trump and Clinton and Obama and the rest of them do. We will refuse to allow our struggle to be contained within the social system. It's akin to being on a slave plantation or living in the era of legal slavery, legal colonial slavery, and restricting your struggle to one of trying to get beneficent or kinder, gentler slavery as opposed to overturning slavery itself. We opt to overturn slavery. Uhuru.
Uhuru! Overturn slavery. Uhuru. Fist up. Get these pigs. Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much for that answer. And if you would like to support Black Power news, revolutionary news in the narrative of the African working class, please make sure to go to theburningspear.com right now and get your burning spear. Uhuru. Uhuru. So, Chairman, our next question is from Didan Wakiuri from Greenville, North Carolina. His question is, in V.I. Lenin's State and Revolution, he talks about democracy ceasing itself or withering away, and that democracy is also a state, and that consequently democracy will also disappear when the state disappears. Can you touch on that? And this question is around Chapter 5, African Socialist Internationalist Dual Power versus New African Opportunism. Uhuru.
I think that's a really important question, and in many ways that question is associated with what we've been talking about up to now, especially when we talk about opportunism, et cetera, because there are people who have felt like it's possible to win what they've characterized as democracy without having to take on the essence of bourgeois power, of power of any ruling class in any society at all, which is the state. And the state is this whole bureaucracy that is sustained by powers of coercion, by armies and police and courts, systems and things like that. And so there are some who actually think that we can fight for democracy. We see that today when people are running around, saying like hands up, don't shoot, and Black Lives Matter. Black lives do not matter to the colonial state. And the colonial state is organized for the purpose of shooting the colonized. So to say that is to liquidate the relationship that we have to the state. And this debate and discussion that is referenced here by Comrade Dedan is one that has to do with a struggle that V.I. Lenin, who led the revolution that occurred in Russia in 1917 that resulted in the Soviet Union coming into existence. He had a struggle all up and down the line with various forms of opportunism and people who came up with all kinds of reasons not to fight to take power, like it's the wrong language, something like that. What Lenin ended up having to help people understand is when you talk about the state as it relates to this struggle that they were involved in and that most of the Europeans were involved in, it's really important to understand that most of the socialists and communists of that era had paid little attention to the struggles of colonized peoples around the world and did not understand the struggles of colonized peoples of the world as critical to overturning capitalism. And so what he said to them quite correctly is that democracy in these relationships is only a form of the state. It's just a form of the state. To fight for democracy is not to fight for the power of the working class. And as we know, when we talk about a form of the state, that's one of the things that we saw, for example, in South Africa. Everybody was up against, get rid of apartheid, apartheid, apartheid. Apartheid was a form of the state. That was, they were saying, fight for democracy in that context. And so they fought against this form of the state, and the masses in what they call South Africa are worse off today, literally, than they were under the apartheid system in terms of their material conditions, et cetera, with the exception of a handful of them. And this handful controls the narrative that says that we are much better off now than we were before. So we're looking at the form of the state. In Egypt, when we saw what they characterized as the beginning of the so-called, what kind of spring did they call that? Some kind of, what spring was it? Arab Spring. It was directed, this uprising, this mass mobilization was directed at the president and Mubarak, and the police who are always in every country, in every instance, the police as an arm of the state is the first line to protect the social system. That's what the police in our community are about. That they're not there for crime. If they were there for crime, they would have locked up Kavanaugh when he was 17 years old, the guy who's going to be on the Supreme Court. They're not there for crime. They're to protect the social system. They're there to protect Kavanaugh. Yeah. You understand? And so the police rolled out and tried to crush this uprising. And of course, the U.S. government and other imperialist forces finally saw the handwriting on the wall, and to stop the resistance, to stop the mass movement of the people, they got Mubarak to resign. And they put him in a comfortable jail. And then the people said, well, we don't want the police anymore, we want the army. Because the army was something that was more directly attached to U.S. imperialist power. The U.S. government had been pumping something like $2 or $3 billion a year into the Egyptian army. They controlled the Egyptian army. And so, but the army was just another expression of the same state power. So everybody's talking about, wow, you know, we're free. They thought they were free, and then the army came in, and they started wiping out. They killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people to more effectively crush that rebellion than the police ever could have done. So what we're saying is that democracy is simply a form of the state, except in the struggle against colonialism. against the occupation. Especially in a situation like this, we say that the highest expression of democracy is to limit or make impossible the ability of the colonial state to affect the lives of the people. That's why we say black community control the police. That's why we come up with programs and things like that that pushes back the colonial state in terms of its participation in our lives, because the colonial state is that instrument that's used to keep us affixed to colonialism. So to get rid of, to recognize that when you talk about democracy, when you talk about it is a form of the state, and we say we want to overthrow democracy, because that's to overthrow the state in the relationship that we have with us. That's what Lenin was talking about, and I unite with that. Uhuru.
Uhuru! Yes, down with colonialism. Ain't that right, comrades? Uhuru. That is right. So, Chairman, our next question we have is from a longtime veteran of the African People's Socialist Party, Comrade Omowale Kafing from Houston. And his question's around Chapter 6, putting dual power into practice. His question is, Uhuru Chairman, what about the institutions of world tribunals and black people's grand juries? Question mark. Uhuru, thank you for that question, Comrade Omowale Kafing.
Uhuru, Comrade Kafing is raising the same question that we've been talking about. When we talk about dual power, we are talking about a power that is in a contest with the colonial state power. Colonial state power dominates virtually every aspect of our lives. There's nothing that an African does in any community in the world where we are not immediately confronted with colonial state power. That's the reason that just 2 or 3 days ago, right here in St. Louis, the police shot down several times, gunned down a 15-year-old African child, saying that there's some kind of disturbance happened, and somebody said that one of them had a gun and came up and shot this 15-year-old child several times. And I don't know if he had a gun or not. The people said he didn't have a gun, but everybody in St. Louis got a gun. And it's legal to have guns. So the possession of a gun in and of itself is not the crime. The crime, if we were able to disassociate crime from the state itself, the fact is that there's a colonized, there's a foreign oppressor state, and it has no regard for the lives of Africans or anybody else. It's a state. It's a hostile foreign state power, and they killed this brother. So our approach to this question has always been the contest has to express itself in more than just a demonstration in the streets. We have to institutionalize the struggle for African people to have and exercise political power that is an opponent of the political power of the bourgeoisie, of the ruling class, of the colonial state. We have to be now even in the process of creating our own independent state power. And to have your own independent state power is to be creating a power that's opposed to the power of the colonizer. That's what Jesus, how he was able to respond to the Pharisees when they came up and asked him, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Because to pay taxes to Caesar was to pay taxes to a foreign colonial power. And that's why we say black community control of the police. Our objective is to control the state, the institutions of the state, instruments of state power. And that we don't mean by just having a black person who's in working for the U.S. government presiding over these institutions. We're talking about popularizing and, to the extent possible, putting state power in the hands of the people. And we say black community control of the police, not black people on the police department, in the police department, black community control of the police. And that's why we, the bourgeoisie has its own grand jury, and it always finds the cops innocent of murder and what have you. That's why we say we create our own grand jury. And we can even take the same information evidence. That's what we did with the Mike Brown case. After the killer, Darren Wilson, the state refused, under Bob McCullough, refused to indict this guy. we pulled together our own grand jury with people from the St. Louis area and heard the same basic evidence, and it didn't take us several months to do that. We acted just like the ordinary white people grand juries do, and we heard all the evidence and came to a different conclusion. Our people need to learn how to appreciate and exercise our own power. The thing is, the only difference, when people try to dissuade us and they say, oh, this is a mock trial. No, sir, no, this is not a mock trial. This is not a mock grand jury. The one the white people had was mock. Ours is the real deal. If there's anything that distinguishes what we do from what they do, is that they got the guns. They have the organized capacity to carry out the verdict that they have. They can make a verdict, and then they can send an army to your house to make sure that you show up and make sure that you go to jail and make sure they strap you in to some chamber that results in killing you. We don't have that power yet, but the signal of the need to attain that power is the fact that we have our own grand juries, we have our own tribunals. We put them on trial. We put the system on trial. And then the next thing we have to do, and that's one step toward the attainment of state power, the next thing we have to do is moving forward is to grab the ability to carry out the verdicts and sentences that we put forward. So we are constantly in the process of exercise of state power and creating that, developing a passive act, helping the people to grow accustomed to the idea that you can exercise state power. You that have been defined in such horrible ways and been taught over and over again of our social and moral ineptitude, you can participate in setting the terms for how we're going to relate to everybody in the world. We can have the power, we can exercise the power, and we're just practicing now. This is a carryover in many ways of the 60s that we called to be a dress rehearsal. We're involved now in making the real deal. And that is, we plan to govern. We plan to govern. We plan to govern.
We plan to govern. Uhuru, Chairman, I just really want to appreciate your answers. And also, during this study, you have told us on multiple times that African internationalism is the theory of the African working class, but it's not just for the working class. It's for the entire world and all oppressed people who want to end to any form of oppression. And that is spoken true, especially through the many comments that we have gotten, one of them being from Velu Anamalali. I'm sorry if I messed up your name. I'm sorry. Anamali, who says, I felt like I am hearing the powerful speeches of my dear brother, Ronoku Rashidi. I am from India, who belong to the downtrodden community of the Dalits. Thank you, Chairman Omaliya Shatella. Uhuru, Chairman. So our next question is from Chapter 7, The State of the Party, Part 1, from a YouTube user named Marshall Villager. Their question is, are there other advanced attachments that the African People's Socialist Party accepts to merge with in the future? Or does the African People's Socialist Party see itself as the definite vanguard of the revolution? Uhuru.
Well, you know, you can't build a revolutionary party and a revolutionary movement based on expectations to merge with somebody else. You have to assume the responsibility to lead, the responsibility to make the revolution, but you cannot leave out the possibility that in the process of so doing, and that other forces will emerge or will reveal themselves, expose themselves to us and to this process. And of course, ours is a process that's open to that. I want to tell you that we spent several years and thousands of dollars traveling across the earth throughout Europe and in many places in Africa, trying to locate, identify revolutionary forces that could participate in creating what we call the African Socialist International. What is the African Socialist International? Which is an international party of revolutionary African people, and it was without success. And we traveled everywhere. It didn't mean that we didn't meet people. It didn't mean that we didn't have conferences and things like that, and that we paid for, we sponsored, we made them happen But it finally came to us that we had to go ahead and build it. We didn't have the time, and we could not locate those revolutionary vanguard forces. Now, there are people and groups that we work with, and proudly we can say that we work with Unión de Barrio, which is a part of the Mexican National Liberation Movement, and which has itself been a stalwart force that's kept the Mexican national revolution alive after the defeat of the revolution of the 1960s, and that has moved to advance that, and with whom we've established great relationships. We have at different times had powerful relationships with groups like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We have even had great relationships prior to the 1979 capture of power by the mullahs in Iran. We had great relationships with the revolutionary communist sector of that movement before it was crushed out of existence. So we've had a history of identifying and working with any revolutionary forces that could function as the advanced detachment of the societies in which they where they were located and that they represented. And so we're not close to that, but yeah, you can't say that. We're not saying that we one day hope to be the advanced detachment. We expect one of these days it might happen, or if we can get other forces to join with us. We've been around now for 47 years, and it'd be insane to, after 47 years. Would we wait another 47 years? I might not be here then as an individual, but we expect to govern, as I said, and we expect to win this revolutionary project. And I don't know of any other revolutionary party in the African world that is involved practically in trying to solve the problems of revolution and uniting the African revolution. If they exist, I would not mind knowing them and seeing what it is that we could learn from each other and what our possibilities of unification might be. Uhuru.
Uhuru! Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much for, yes. Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much for that answer. Vanguard up! Yes, and if you would like to learn more about the Vanguard Party, the African People's Socialist Party, please go to apspuhuru.org. Again, apspuhuru.org. Chairman, we have another great comment that came through the past weeks from Fred Barkley, and he says, this should be taught every Sunday. Just like we've been programmed every Sunday with their lies in the church, we should be unprogrammed and enlightened by this truth. Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. Yes, and we do this every Sunday. Please make sure to like and subscribe to Chairman's page and also our emailing list so you can get updates on the Sunday studies. Hashtag Omali taught me. Uhuru. So our next question, Chairman, is Chapter 8. Is from Chapter 8, The State of the Party, Part 2. And this is from Comrade Mensa Ajanku from Las Vegas, Nevada. And his question is, how is it that continue to push those petty bourgeoisie forces who attempt to or do join the International People's Democratic Uhuru movement to commit class suicide and completely unite with African internationalism? Can the petty bourgeoisie be effective in this movement as activist forces and still lie on the backs of the colonized people? Thank you for that interesting question, Mensa.
It is an interesting question. It's one like a prosecutor might ask. It's what they call push polling, that you have the answer embedded that you demand. You demand a certain answer to what poses itself as a question. First of all, what we want to say is that the struggle that we're involved in is characterized by two things. One, it is a struggle for national liberation. The struggle for national liberation is one that involves everybody in the nation, regardless of their class location. The petty bourgeoisie artists and cultural workers and elements of the working class, people who engaged in stuff like single issues, if you will, prison reform and things like that, that don't automatically and necessarily lead to revolutionary transformation, but they are a part of the force that's out there struggling on some ways, whether they are conscious of it or not, in the struggle against the national oppression of our people. That's what people mean when they talk about the so-called prison industrial complex. Well, I don't know about a prison industrial complex. I just know it's colonialism, that the colonizer does these things to us. And so those people who fight what they call a prison industrial complex that has African people locked in these prisons actually engage in some kind of struggle against the symptoms of colonial domination, colonial control, colonial terror in our community. So, you know, they might not have any interest or assume that they have any interest in overturning the whole relationship, the whole system. They might be people who think that a problem is that you locked up somebody, what they call unjustly, as if the colonizer can lock you up justly. How can the colonizer lock you up justly, right? When the colonial rule is one that's imposed on a people at gunpoint. So there are going to be people from the African petty bourgeoisie that would join in the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. In fact, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement was founded as an institution, the primary task of which was initially to overturn or to expose and defeat the counterinsurgency and to lead the struggle for democracy. In this instance, recognizing that democracy is what? It is the self-determination. The highest expression of democracy for the colonized people is self-determination, self-government, self-rule, and what have you. So, and NPDUM is an entity created by the party that opens the door to various sectors of the African community to come in and participate in the struggle against colonial domination, national oppression of African people, but it is under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, which means that it is under the leadership of a social force and an organized expression of a social force with an objective in overturning not only colonialism, but overturning class oppression, class exploitation. And so that's what NPDUM is. And there are going to be, from time to time, various forces who will come into NPDUM, and when we do our work best, and the forces we are dealing with capable of doing so, we will deepen their relationship with the class aspirations of the African working class. There are sectors that, as a social force, the African petty bourgeoisie as a class will always betray the revolution. As a class, they will always betray the revolution. But there are individuals among the petty bourgeoisie that can commit class suicide and unite with the aspirations and the interests of the African working class. And NPDUM gives them an opportunity, first an opportunity for the whole nation of people who are opposed to colonial domination, national oppression, to do that. And for those sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie that can go beyond that, that can actually commit class suicide, that can actually abandon the interests of the petty bourgeoisie and unite with the interests and aspirations of the African working class, they can do that. And we meet people who are able to do that. In fact, we're entertaining. We're looking at some people, even as we have this discussion, who might otherwise. And, you know, and when you start talking about certain aspects of class structure in the African community, it's usually on a pretty shaky foundation anyway. It's really shallow. We're talking about people who at best, you know, you see one generation or so that's you know, away from the working class. And if you look at any of the data, what we see is that most of these people who call themselves middle class are so bad off in the real world that they couldn't, that if they lost a job, they couldn't pay the mortgage on their house for 2 months. You know, that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at. But anyway, we open the door for potential for people to be able to commit class suicide, and that's what NPDUM facilitates. And NPDUM is a dynamic expression of our revolutionary movement. And in many ways, what we've called revolutionary organizations in the past were organizations that function much like what we call on NPDUM to do. And that includes groups like the Black Panther Party and others. Because while people like to recognize the Panther Party as being some revolutionary organization, it was really profound, and it was in many ways we can identify at the center of the revolution, but we got to remember that the Panthers was just the most militant sector of the struggle for national liberation at a particular time in our history. And now what we have is a revolutionary organization that starts off as a revolutionary organization in the form of the African People's Socialist Party that was able to create an organization that can do the work like the Panthers did in terms of raising the struggle for national liberation and pushing that to the max beyond what the African petty bourgeoisie can do on its own. The African petty bourgeoisie is extraordinarily limited in what it can do on its own, but under the leadership of the African working class, the sky is the limit. So I don't know, Comrade Mensah, I hope I responded to the question that you just raised. Uhuru.
Uhuru! Uhuru! Thank you so much for another amazing answer, Chairman. We have another comment that came through the past weeks of this amazing political report, and it's from Wiley Paul, who says, "This is the knowledge we need to progress in the world." We have another question from the same chapter from Comrade Director of Agitation Propaganda, Akile Anai from St. Petersburg, Florida. She says, "Uhuru, Chairman, salute to yet another brilliant chapter of the political report. The future of the party and the African nation is bright. If this report is any indication, I want to salute you, Chairman, for being the visionary, unrelenting leader of the African Revolution and for solving the problems of the revolution, our organizations and institutions being the clearest examples. One of the newest fronts to our party, as mentioned in the chapter, is Communities United for Reparations and Economic Development, based in St. Petersburg, Florida, formed after the party's dynamic electoral campaigns of 2017. Can you speak to the party's role in spearheading the call to seize the electoral arena, the ballot and the bullet, and the future of our parties participating in this area through CURED and our other organizations?" Uhuru.
Well, first of all, I want to say is that we have been engaged in the struggle. We haven't done it as well as it needs to be done, as well as we're capable of doing. The struggle to create, build, develop, promote Communities United for Reparations and Economic Development, CURED. It came out of an election that we just participated in St. Petersburg, Florida, which was an exciting and extraordinary election process. But I want to say that this question, this issue, this election, this work that we've done with CURED really is an expression of a struggle that we have been promoting and working with for a long, long, long time. In the history of our party. And one way that we've taken on this struggle is to try to create a process wherein the mystery of electoral politic and participation in electoral politic is overturned. There has been for some time now in our struggle an outstanding question of whether or not the African Revolution or African revolutionaries can and should participate in electoral politics. There has been an assumption by some that electoral politics is the only way forward, the only way to advance the struggle, and by others that to participate in electoral politics is simply a dead-end street and that it represents a certain form of selling out or something to that effect. And what we've done is, try to examine the whole history of the participation of African people in the electoral process, recognizing clearly that the electoral process was not established for anybody to overturn the system. It was established to protect the system. Yeah. The electoral process is simply a way for the bourgeoisie to exist in nonviolent struggle among itself for capture control of the state. The electoral process in countries like the United States and most of what is referred to as Western Europe, and place where Europeans have gone, like Australia and Canada and etc., the electoral process is the thing that makes it unnecessary for different heads of state within a particular social system, or different leaders or different rulers to simply get their own armies and rush out and attack others to capture power and control. What it does is it allows for these contenders, these contending, these different sectors of the bourgeoisie who are in contention to have this nonviolent struggle through the electoral process. It disguises itself as some kind of democratic expression of the will of the people. And it has to do that because the bourgeoisie is a tiny sector of every population. But it is a craven social force. It is a nasty, nasty social force that commits all kinds of offenses against human beings. And just looking at the Kavanaugh process and the Pope and the Catholic Church and the rape and everything that's now coming to common view gives us clear evidence of who the bourgeoisie is. So it is a small group, and even though it controls the ideological high ground, it helps to define the world outlook of most of the people, so that sometimes victims can know that they're being victimized and still participate. It's like somehow, you know, children grow up in families where a father or a stepfather might molest the child, and people act like they don't know it and don't want to say anything. And the Catholic Church, you know, even as it exposes itself, and I don't mean, there's no double entendre that's intended here. Even as the Catholic Church exposes itself, there are people who are Catholics who will read the newspapers every day and be saddened by it, but will go and do Mass and confession, you know, right afterwards. And they're going to stick with that church. So that happens from time to time. But the fact is that increasingly people have an opportunity to make choices, and it's our responsibility to help people make good choices about what they do. People have an alternative now offered to them that's separate and different from what the bourgeoisie has offered them. What we have done is try to help people understand what the electoral process is about, first of all. There's nothing sacred about it. It's not in the Bible. If somebody is not having elections, doesn't mean that they're rotten and crummy, as opposed to the United States that does have elections, as opposed to the white nationalist illegitimate state of Israel that does have elections, as opposed to what even was the apartheid state in South Africa that did have elections. So they were characterized as democratic, while the people who were fighting against them were often characterized as terrorists and the rest of that. What we want to say is that the elections, there's nothing sacred, there's nothing biblical, there's no scripture. You can't go, and I'm saying this to all the people who need evidence of scripture to justify what you do. You will not find elections in the Bible. There's no place you can go to. There's no book on elections in the Bible. It's something that was created again. In this instance, the electoral process was created to protect the system, not to overturn it. So this nonviolent, you know, process under a certain social system, and it is an apparatus, it is an institution in many ways of the state. So the struggle of African people were involved in was conditioned by the fact that we lived in a country where a bourgeois democracy did exist. It did exist. Slavery was not under Saddam Hussein or something like that. Slavery occurred in a democratic institution. It was a democratic institution. It was legal. And people voted on slavery, on how it should exist and whether it should exist and the rest of that. And actually, people eventually went to war over this question, not because of sympathy with African people, but what it meant to the economic interests of the bourgeoisie at that time. And some Africans who didn't understand that and thought, again, that elections were biblical and all this other kind of stuff have been confused. Did the white people fight to end slavery or not? Yeah, they fought to end slavery because it represented their interest to do it, not because they were sympathetic to what was happening to African people. They didn't wake up one day and somebody had an epiphany and say, you know, we've been treating the black people so bad, let's make a revolution, let's make a war to free them. No, 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 no. It didn't happen like that at all. So the electoral process, much of our struggle then was because power seems to come through this thing that white people were doing. And so the struggle often with the end of legal slavery represented itself as a struggle to participate in this process. So that represents what's supposed to be freedom. And of course, it was the first instance that we thought we had accomplished something, and this is instructive, I believe, was at the end of the Civil War, and with what was called the Reconstruction period. And the Reconstruction period was characterized by this time where the southern states were to prove themselves worthy of entering into the Union. They had to do certain things as it relates to rights of people who were enslaved and, you know, et cetera. And so for a very brief period of time, but through Reconstruction, some Africans were elected in the governments in the South, and people actually thought we had it going on. Until the contest, but let me just say that this was not some smooth road. Even during this era of Reconstruction that we're talking about, where some people went to power, white people and mobs were still killing Africans in various places around this country, raiding places where Africans had been elected to office and capturing the elected African officials and lynching and doing all kinds of other horrible things. It wasn't like, okay, now there is, we lost the war, now there is Reconstruction and black people can be elected and everything is wonderful. It wasn't like that. But what did happen was for a brief period of time, there were northern troops that were positioned in the South to protect this process of reentry into the Union by the Southern people, Southern forces that had left the Union had declared war and engaged in struggle. And so there were several thousand troops throughout the South. And they were also there to protect the ability, in theory, of African people to participate. That's what part of Reconstruction allowed for. And there's a lot to be said about this. And I'm not trying to say all of it because, again, it was not this little thing that all the white people say, okay, let this happen, et cetera. Because even the people who were supposedly for the end of slavery didn't like this idea of African people being able to vote in the South, have freedom of movement and all this stuff, because the southern part of the economy was a part of the economy. You understand? The southern part of the economy was a part of the economy. The entire U.S. Economy was based on this relationship between bankers and stockbrokers and all this other stuff that might be located in the north and the southern based production that was happening from enslaved African labor. And so just because you were free, quote unquote, didn't mean that the white people wanted you to be able to do everything that white people could do, because that disrupted the production process, et cetera. But that's a whole nother story that we could be telling forever. The thing that I do want to say is that in the 1960s, Africans succeeded by the 1960s and under the leadership of the African petty bourgeoisie, and I say the African petty bourgeoisie, a sector, liberal sector of the African petty bourgeoisie, because what had happened, as you know, the Garvey movement that had been the strongest movement of African people in the world, not just in the United States, had said that Africa is for Africans at home and abroad. and that we got all of this land and resources, et cetera, in Africa, that we're crazy to be tiddling around here trying to go into their system. Let's create our own thing, right, that's based on freedom and independence and self-determination and self-government, self-rule. That's what Garvey intended to do. But since the struggle under the leadership of the liberal sector of the African petty bourgeoisie happened in this country, it happened in various other places where the revolution was crushed, like it was the Garvey movement, and we had gone through this period in the 1960s where people fought for black power. That was the main slogan on the streets. After burn, baby, burn, then we heard that being translated into black power. Black power, 1965, Watts, California, burn, baby, burn. That broke the whole dam that had been where the pressure of African people wanting to resist and fight back. This dam of self-imposed pacifism, nonviolence, etc., burst open clearly with Watts and the slogan, burn, baby, burn it down. And that began to be something that was representing the movement. You saw the leadership of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the emergence of a struggle for black power, the Black Panther Party. All these things happened. And Black Panther Party had a 10-point program. Jomo had a 7-point program early on. We had organizations that were doing that, were talking about anti-colonialism, black community control of the police, reparations. All this stuff was out there. And Malcolm X was a primary manifestation of what black power meant, black nationalism meant, that we control our own communities, the politics in our own communities, the economy in our own communities. All this was out there, and this is what we were talking about. And then what the government did, this in 1965, where universal suffrage was won, where everybody could vote through the Voting Rights Act, this is during the high tide of the struggle of black people, and the government set about killing revolutionaries, assassinating Malcolm, assassinating Martin Luther King. Killed in 1968 alone more than 30 members of the Black Panther Party, killing us, arresting us, throwing us into prison, kicking us out of the country, chasing us underground, and then said, now you can vote. But they've destroyed all your organizations, almost. They've destroyed all your programs. We had free breakfast for school children programs. Jomo had a free blood bank, had other kinds of programs that we had created among the people and what have you to take care of our people. They were specific to taking care of African people. Those programs were there to do that. And the government crushed the leaders, assassinated the leaders, destroyed the organizations. Now they said you can vote, but the only ones you had to vote for now was the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party did not have a revolutionary program. It had nothing to say about anything that Malcolm talked about, had nothing to say about the Black Panthers talked about, had nothing to say about what any of the revolutionary organizations said about. So what happened was now the Democratic Party is defining what our struggle is about, and this is the thing that turned so many African people off the electoral process. Now our leaders were held captive by the Democratic Party. In the 1972, I think it was, Black National Convention that happened in Gary, Indiana was a pure example. Something like 9,000 African people went to Gary, Indiana to put forth our own program and came up with some relatively militant kinds of positions, etc. But by the time they left Gary, because so many of them were Democratic Party people and etc. who participated in it, by the time they left Gary, the Democratic Party had pulled all of those Negroes out, told them to back off, etc., because it was going to affect the ability of Democrats to win white support and get elected, and that almost destroyed that process. So you had this whole struggle that people were turned off and made ambivalent about that. So what we have done in the African People's Socialist Party is to reintroduce the questions that were driving our revolutionary movement in the 1960s when they killed us. So let's take it into an electoral process. They said that we can vote. This is a democratic expression of the will of the people, and let the people vote on reparations, which is what Citizens United, Communities United Reparations Economic Development. But more than that, we initiated inside the black
is Back Coalition for Social Justice, a whole process through which Africans came together from throughout the country to discuss this question of electoral politics and to arm African working class people and militants from every place to be able to participate effectively and network to fight for political power. We define the politics. So it's not a Democratic Party defined thing. It's not a bourgeois party defined thing. We're saying now we shall use the electoral process as a means by which we introduce these revolutionary critical questions to the advancement of the struggle for African people. We take it into the electoral process. And it's not to say that all the white people most of them will support it, but what we do is put it in a situation where we give an opportunity for all the contradictions to expose themselves in the real world. Do white people really love you because they voted for Barack Hussein Obama? Or will they vote for reparations? Will they vote for black community control of the police? Will they vote to empty these prisons of all these African people that they're stuffing into the colonial? Will they vote against colonialism? That's what it is that we have been able to do. And through this process, we help to develop, along with other people and groups in the Black is Back Coalition, we help to develop a national black political agenda for self-determination that will hold all of the Africans who are running for office and anybody else who's running for office accountable to African people through accountability to this process. Anyway, I know it was a long-winded response, but I felt like it was demanded, required.
Yes, it was. Uhuru! Vanguard up!
Vanguard up!
One Africa!
One nation!
One nation.
One Africa.
Uhuru. Another round of applause for that amazing and profound answer by our chairman, Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru. And if you would like to learn more about how to use the electoral process to advance the African liberation, please go to curedfl.org. Also, go to blackisbackcoalition.org to learn more about the Black is Back Coalition. Uhuru, salute to Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and let's appreciate all those questions that were sent in by our live viewers. Yes. We thank everyone who has attended these studies, both in past and during the last 12 weeks. But we also have a crowd here that comes every morning at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time here in St. Louis, Missouri, and here at the beautiful Aquaba Hall, built by the Black Power Blueprint, with the vision of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the hard work and leadership and dedication of Deputy Chair Ona Zane Yeshitela. So we wanted to give some time for the people that have come every Sunday here physically to gain some knowledge, to learn about the political report, African internationalism, and unite with the Advanced Detachment, the Vanguard, the African People's Socialist Party, and also to attend and learn more about the Congress at apspcongress.org, which is October 6th through October 12th here in St. Louis. So without further ado, we have 3 questions from here locally. First question from Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee. Round of applause, Uhuru!
Uhuru, Uhuru, Chairman, I just really want to salute this past 12 weeks and the several years that you have been holding studies and political education every Sunday morning. But the past 12 weeks, reading the political report for the 7th Congress of the Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment, the African People's Socialist Party that's coming up, has been extremely profound and winning and so powerful. And as a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, with the mandate to go into the white community to win the reparations from other white people and to stand in genuine solidarity with the right of African people to total liberation, to the return of Africa and all the stolen resources. This has been very profound to see, and I salute the fact that the African People's Socialist Party, as you say, has solved every problem left unsolved by the by the defeat of the African Revolution by the U.S. government counterinsurgency. And I wanted to read, one of those is the question of what to do with the white people. How can white people, have a relationship not only to the African Revolution, but to the future, and to build for the first time a principled relationship, an apology, a rectification to African people and the people on the planet Earth. And I just wanted to read something from your previous political report, An Uneasy Equilibrium, the political report to the 6th Congress, which you actually read 2 chapters of in the past 2 weeks, The Question of the Nation. And you say, the European sense of sameness, self-perception, and subjective expression necessary for binding the emergent working class to its newly forged bourgeoisie is white and Christian. The material base of the European nation is the parasitic capitalist system that bore it in Europe. The capitalist system feeds the entire European nation through its cannibalistic, parasitic relationship to Africa and most of the world. And I just wanted to see if you could address that and how the crisis of imperialism is affecting the sense of sameness of the European nation, if at all, and the conclusions the party came to.
Unity through reparation. Unity through reparation.
Uhuru, I want to thank Comrade Chairwoman Penny Hess for that intervention. And I think it's a part of some of the most important political work that we've done that is expressed in that recognition. Here's what we have, and this is part of what makes the situation for white nationalism and the European nation so perilous, because it's built on a false foundation. This sense of sameness is built on a false foundation. And part of what I mean by that is that peoples and groups and anything that's being defined is defined in relationship to other things. And so the European nation came into existence based on its relationship to Africa particularly, and primarily, but how Africa and Africans have been defined has been purely fanciful, fictional, created as a means of being able to justify. It's a part of a superstructure. This self-perception becomes a part of a superstructure that rests upon a foundation of slavery and colonialism. And it is fictional. So what the European self-perception is based on is this fiction that they've created to define the rest of us in order to justify enslavement and the horrible things that they do to us. So that can only work to the extent that the slave is silenced, can't speak for ourselves, not challenging not only the self-perception, but challenging the economic base upon which this self-perception relies. Y'all with me on that? Yes. So what we see happening unrelentingly around the world is that peoples have been struggling and changing the economic base. Which is, because what we're looking at is a European nation that rests upon a foundation of parasitism. It must be able to suck the blood and the resources of the people of the world to survive. And its self-definition is based on its ability to do that. This becomes the bonding thing. This economic relationship is the binding thing. And that's the thing that's under severe challenge at this very moment. In Afghanistan, that's why there's permanent warfare that's going on. They can't stop fighting people. And not only that, but the people are not just fighting them in the territories that's their territories. They're fighting them in Paris. They're fighting them in St. Louis. They're fighting them, all around the world. And it's very difficult for this notion of who they are to persevere, and now that the Africans and Afghans and Mexicans and other people are saying, this is who we are, not who you said we are. Which means if we are this and not what you said, who the hell are you? Mm-hmm. This is the question that shakes the
the whole concept of sense of sameness. And we saw in the 60s, the sense of sameness challenged so severely by the struggles of the people that white people started growing afros, dreadlocks, and later, and all this other kind of stuff, because the sense of sameness being a part of this is not good. Who wants to be a part of this thing where the organization of rapists, child rapists, everybody knows about it now. The sense of sameness is also, something that's challenged in a very severe way. So, and the way the revolutionary movement grows, and what we have now through the work of the African People's Socialist Party, through this Congress, through these political reports, is that we are now giving definition. We are consolidating an understanding and perception among the African people of our reality, of the world, and how we came to it. And this is becoming a defining factor. It informs not just us intellectually, but how we struggle to change the world as well. And people who came into the Solidarity movement, they were only able to do that because we were engaged in struggle. You understand? This is how the white people were able to break free from who wanted to, who needed to break free from this sense of sameness. And even when white people, and this is one of the most amazing things that I found early on in the work with the Solidarity movement, and people coming to Solidarity movement, is that people don't like their parents. People don't like this relationship they have with each other, but they have no alternative how to break out of this stuff, how to move away from the stuff that they've been living with all this time. And if we don't say it, they can't do it. Do you understand what I'm saying? That nobody can be free of it unless they have an alternative that's defined. And we have been defining an alternative that you can be on the right side of history. You can struggle to overturn this kind of relationship, even though people who are dissatisfied. So instead of saying burn, something about Bernie, feeling the Bernie, feeling the Hillary, which is, well, I won't go there. But, there is an alternative. And that's what I'm saying. And that's what leadership is. That's what the advanced attachment is. That all these people with dissatisfaction, everybody who's watching the Pope, everybody who's watching Kavanaugh, everybody who's watching Trump, everybody who's watching this whole failure of a social system, now it's not enough for them just to see that. What they have to see is a decent way to move forward, to change that, to get out of that process. And they can't see that unless there's an advanced attachment that says, this is the way forward. And that's what we've been able to do up to now. Uhuru.
Unity through.
Reparations. Unity through.
Reparations.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chairman, again for that amazing and profound answer. We have another question here from St. Louis, Missouri, from Comrade Tachara, who is the Economic Director of the Black Power Blueprint. Uhuru!
Uhuru, Chairman. First, I just want to recognize, this real critical struggle that's being made here to arm the party and the masses with ideology and organization, and for putting forth this political report, which acts as a guide for our work over the next 5 years. It helps us sum up the world and set an agenda based on that broadly to ensure that we don't engage in spontaneity and, which is the mother of all opportunism. So it's just critical work. In your report, you talked about the withering away of nations. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I wish we had time to read from that portion of that political report, because in some ways it's I don't know if it's a complex concept or not, but again, we just talked about how in this era, contemporary assumption and understanding what the nation is based on something that happened in Europe, and that is that the European nation was born in a part of a process of destroying the solidarity and unity of Africans and other peoples around the world. I mean, the European nation was born, the European consolidation was born as part of the process of dividing Africa into these untenable entities, of taking parts of the territories that was once known as Mexico, and then even before that of the indigenous peoples. The European nation was born as a part of the process of creating my father's last name to be Waller, and us to be Jones and Smiths and all that stuff. This is part of what gave rise to the European nation. And this sense of sameness that we just talked about, this consolidation of a particular kind of economy as a bonding component of the material component of this European nation. And what we're saying is that the struggle for the liberation of the peoples around the world is challenging that and making it untenable. The European nation is increasingly obviously untenable, and it rests again. It was born as a capitalist entity. It was born as bourgeoisie. The European nation was given rise to by capitalism, and so that's what it rests upon. And it rests, and capitalism itself, as we know, rests upon the consequence of imperial domination, colonialism, slavery, and what have you. So with the growth of the struggle for emancipation by the peoples of the world, with the success of those struggles, with the success of the African liberation movement, which will occur on various different continents, that's important and quantitatively, but qualitatively, it has to do with the resources of Africa, the concentration of resources in Africa that feeds the entire imperialist system. Everything, all of the imperialist powers of the world require for their continuing success the capacity to take all the stuff that they take from Africa, and that includes material and human resources. So to the extent that we continue this movement and respond to something that we just talked about before, in the last question, what is now known as the European nation becomes increasingly untenable. In the success of the African Revolution, the capture of Africa and all of our resources, our emancipation, the beginning of the development of an entire different kind of economy undermines the success, the efficacy of the European nation itself, which is again a bourgeois nation. It's a bourgeois nation. It came into existence as capitalist nation, and this ongoing successful struggle is what we mean in terms of the withering away of nations and other peoples around the world fighting to take back their resources. There is an existential struggle that Europe is involved in trying to maintain a stranglehold on places like Afghanistan and all these places of oppression around the world, and maintaining the artificial borders that were created in Africa and what they now call South America and the rest of them. This is an existential kind of effort that they are involved in. The existence of the European nation requires this kind of relationship. So to the extent that we are successful, we see a withering away of the nation. We see the liberation of Africa contributing to, and Africans contributing to, a withering away of nations. Nations came into existence, as we speak of now, and contemporary nations as a part of the process of controlling the resources of Africa and everybody else, and then the struggle that we make for nationality, for nation, to create and consolidate the African nation, is a part of the process of eliminating nations, because the conquest of this consolidation of African nationality, nationhood, and what have you, undermines, takes the footing out from under nations as they are now recognized. And the struggle for African liberation is a struggle that is demanded by historical necessity. Africa will never know freedom, will never know control of its resources until Africa succeeds in destroying the borders, taking back our sovereignty, taking back our resources, etc., under the leadership of the African working class. That is the beginning of the end, beginning of the liberation of the African nation, and the end of nations as we now know them, beginning of a world without borders, so that the people can live as people in relationship with each other all around the world. Uhuru.
Black people, united! We'll never be defeated. I said black people, united! We'll never be defeated. Uhuru!
Comrade, what I would like to do just now is a couple things. I know we're out of time, but I do want to recognize that within the last couple of days, a dear comrade of ours, Pablo Aceves, who was a member of Unión de Barrio, just passed away in San Diego, California. I met him 32 years or so ago. He was about 18 years old. He died at 50 with some kind of aneurysm, I'm told. He and Unión de Barrio have been dear comrades. We've had more than 30-year relationship, an alliance between the different organizations that was a reflection of the potential alliance that can exist between the African and Mexican people here. And I say here, I'm tempted to say in this country, but this country, as we know, defined by artificial borders in part as a consequence of the theft of half of Mexico. So I just wanted to send out our condolences and to the family and comrades of Comrade Pablo Aceves, and to say that the African People's Socialist Party, the African Socialist International, extend our condolences and want to say that we are here for anything that, that the family and the movement needs of us. So that's one thing I wanted to do. I also feel like it's extremely important to recognize those dear comrades who, members of the Uhuru movement and African internationalists who are working very hard to build this revolutionary project without the advantage of having the same kind of access to our headquarters as most people in this country. Those comrades in occupied Tanzania, commonly known as South Africa. Those young comrades under the leadership of Comrade Tafari, the chair of the South African People's Socialist Party of Tanzania, occupied Tanzania. I want to really express and help you to understand, and help all the others who are participating in this meeting and this discussion today to understand how we recognize the significance of what it is that you are doing to win the unity of the African people and African revolution in the struggle to defeat that neo-colonial regime that is there as a part of the overall struggle that we have to make to unite Africa, to liberate and unite Africa. I want to express my deepest and profound appreciation for the comrades in Kenya. Under the leadership of this dynamic, powerful young woman, Kask, who has just been doing extraordinary work to build our presence in Kenya, and who I suspect is participating in this discussion at this very moment. And I want to salute you, comrade, and I want you and the comrades in Kenya to know that you're not alone. You are connected with those comrades in occupied Tanzania, even though the government wouldn't allow you to get to the conference that we just had in Africa that was in occupied Tanzania a couple of weeks ago. You are not alone. You're with those comrades. You're with the comrades who in Europe who are doing this work. You're with the African People's Socialist Party here. The comrades in Australia are with you, and the comrades in India and the Caribbean are also with you. So I just want to recognize these forces, and to also say that that we are part of a powerful new movement that will define what the African revolution will look like henceforth. and we will win this collective power that we have to have in order for our people to be free. So I wanted to say that, and that we know you are there. We know sometimes we can't communicate that easily because of the infrastructure in some of the places where you're located does not permit it, does not allow it. And because the imperialist makes it so difficult for us to get to each other. But we know you are there, and we appreciate all the work that you're doing, and anticipate your participation in the 7th Congress that will be happening just next weekend. So uhuru.
Uhuru! Izweletu! E-Africa! Uhuru, Chairman. Thank you so much for that. And our last question is from a young comrade, 19-year-old, who heard the call to join the party and to get connected to this amazing movement, to the Vanguard, all the way from Chicago, Illinois, and came down to join and to build for the Congress, our 7th Party Congress, that you can learn more about at apspcongress.org. Comrade Musa. Uhuru!
Appreciate my leadership, the office of the Deputy Chair, T'Chara, this process. It's been beautiful. Chairman, all your work up to this point. And my question is, what is the difference or the distinction made between the concept of race and nation? Uhuru.
First, I think it's important to say that race is just an artificial false concept that was created to justify the oppression of African people. It created in its contemporary form how we understand this concept of race today that is applied to people with certain physical attributes. And that's something, again, that the bourgeoisie did. And everybody, and because the white power ruling class has the ability to define, they define themselves as nations. You go back and you find all of the definitions of what a nation is that up to now, that used by most folk, define us out of nationality, that define us out of nationhood. We are not nations. We are races. So they've characterized us as a race. And so you are engaged in fighting for racial liberation. And the other thing is that, well, they don't say racial liberation because you don't fight to liberate yourself as a race. What they've done is take this concept, this false concept of race, again, that is defined essentially and solely on biological attributes and other kinds of characteristics that they might define as cultural or something to that effect, with a certain hierarchy that puts white people on top. And the work of all of us who are fighting against what has now come to be known as fighting against racism. You're stuck in this situation where you're fighting to get the oppressor to like you or to change his mind about you, etc., as opposed to fighting for power. Nations, nationalities, there's a material basis for what we talk about when we talk about nations. Nations, we say, often occupy space and defined by both subjective and objective factors. We talked about, and they have come into existence in part as a consequence of historical necessity. The European nation, as we know of it, came into existence because the political economy that economies that existed in Europe could not advance under feudalism beyond where they were. And the way it advanced was to go out and capture resources and peoples and things like that. That's what gave rise to what we know as capitalism. If the European what we now call Europe and the European societies were to advance, then there had to be a way for them to combine and a certain kind of a development of productive forces had to occur. So instead, how that happened in history was through slavery, colonialism, and pillage. And this is what gave definition to this group. And this is what contributed to how the Europeans have been defined. And it was this historical requirement to move beyond feudalism into this new situation that facilitated the growth of a whole new social system. For nations to be free, peoples have to be conscious of having an identity that's separate from the identity of the nation that's responsible for your oppression. If you're fighting as a race, you're not conscious of anything that distinguishes you as a force that can overturn this relationship. Racial liberation is not even heard of. You know, it's unheard of. And so what you're finding that Africans are doing, again, is adapting either to the definitions of civilization appropriateness and et cetera that's giving us by the people who create the concept of race. So we're always fighting against race as opposed to fighting for the liberation of our nations. In practical terms, that's what it is that we are talking about. And I would really hope that people would read that chapter on uneasy equilibrium, and that's been placed in this political report to the 7th Congress precisely because we think it's of that significance to get a fuller, more developed kind of discussion around this question, because I think it's a critically important question. It is the only explanation that I've seen that informs us in a way that contributes to our liberation, that anticipates African people being a free and independent people once again as a part of this process of destroying the social system that came into existence to enslave us and that requires our slavery as a condition for its continuing to exist. And you don't fight against that system when you are fighting against racism or fighting to be a part of it. You're not fighting against that system. You're fighting to perfect that system. And what we have to do is overturn that system. We overturn that system as a part of the liberation of the African nation, and then also it functions as a means by which of undermining the existence, the continuity of the European nation itself. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, thank you so much for that. For all remaining questions about our party, the political report, or anything else of that nature, you have an opportunity to ask and hear the answers at our 7th Party Congress. Uhuru! Again, on October 6th to October 12th in St. Louis, Missouri. You can visit apspcongress.org to check out all the details, view our program, download the political report, and more. All these answers and then some are at this 7th Congress. You don't want to miss this. Vanguard up!
Vanguard up!
I want to appreciate Chairman Omali Yeshitela for answering these questions for the world. And I want to thank all of you again for tuning into Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. This study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation Propaganda, winning the war of ideas for the worldwide revolutionary news and analysis. Visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via Black Power 96 application on your Apple and Android phones or online at blackpower96.org. Did you unite with what you heard today and want to learn more about how you can get involved with the African People's Socialist Party? Visit apspahuru.org for all information regarding how you can apply. Last chance, everybody. The 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party will be October 6th or October 12th, again in St. Louis, Missouri, and is themed Vanguard, the advanced detachment of the African Revolution. A part of this historic event will be the Black Power Masquerade Ball with live cultural performances, dancing, best dressed contest, and a silent African auction. All info around the Congress and banquet can be found at apspcongress.org. Again, apspcongress.org. Register today and Vanguard up!
Vanguard up!
That's right. Join the Freedom Mass Choir. The Freedom Mass Choir is an all-African community choir that sings songs of resistance and revolution led by the African poor and working class. The choir will also be performing at the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. Members are located throughout the United States and attend weekly rehearsals, both in person and via live stream and video. Sign up by emailing blackpowerchoir@gmail.com or call 727-537-6736. On November 3rd and 4th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations will be conducting its annual march, rally, and conference in Washington, D.C. We will be marching on the White House, y'all. This march is appropriately themed, There is no peace. Africa and Africans are at war. U.S. to the world, comply or die. More information about this historic event can be found at blackisbackcoalition.org. Sign up, y'all, and become part of history. March on that White House lawn. December 9th to December 16th, come cruise with us aboard the Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise, a time for revolutionaries to kick back and relax. You'll be on board with our chairman, Amalia Shatella, the leader of the African nation, while getting to enjoy the spoils of the ship. Destinations include Grand Canyon, Mahogany Bay, Belize, Grand Cayman, Mahogany Bay, Belize, and Cozumel, Mexico. Get signed up today at uhurulegacycruise.org. This cruise also serves as a fundraiser for the African Socialist International, you guys. So come on and sign up, sign your grandmamas up, sign your whole family up. Uhuru! I said uhuru! Uhuru! And forward to the party's 7th Congress. See you in St. Louis. Vanguard up! Vanguard up! Uhuru!